Dear friends, I have heard uh, on another two by two interview on YouTube some discussion about the concept of faith lines or going by faith lines. And I think there's a lot to this that needs to be unpacked. So I'm going to try that today. So just for people who may not be aware, uh, ostensibly two by two ministers go out into the world to do evangelization, and they go by faith lines, meaning that they do not take any money with them, and uh, they pray and they hope that God will move other people to give them money, to give them accommodation, to give them food. Okay, so this concept of going by faith lines, they got this. They think this is what happened in the New Testament. It's not. The Apostle Paul was a tent maker. He made money for himself. Sometimes people give him food, some people give him housing, but it wasn't 100% of the time, that's for certain. They also got this concept from some preachers from other denominations around the turn of the 20th century. Some other basically radicals in one of these uh, great revival periods in what was going on in the British Isles at that time. So this concept is, if you're preaching the correct information, God will provide for your material well-being. So, in the sense that uh, God will move other people to give you things. Now, that's sort of a strange concept because when you go out into the world and you are, say, you're a preacher, people are interested in talking to you because you're non-threatening and you seem to know something. Especially, you remember going out into these rural areas or small towns or whatever, there's not a lot of educated people there. There's not like professors from universities giving lectures, okay, or things like that, certainly in those years. So, and there wasn't any television, there wasn't any radio in those early years, being in the 20th century. So, if there was some new guy who was standing on the corner preaching or put up a tent and did some preaching, a lot of people in town or in the countryside would go to it because it's a novelty. I mean, it's something very different from their ordinary lives, and it's entertaining. That's a large part of what these great religious revivals are, is entertainment. To be quite honest, so it's entertaining, and maybe you'll learn something. Who knows? So of course you also you start, after the preacher gives his preaching, people crowd around to ask questions, and they're kind of curious where he's going next. And he says, well, I don't really have any plans, blah, blah, blah. Well, they want to get him have more private one-on-one interaction. So they'll say, well, why don't you come stay at my house? Why don't you come for a meal with me? Right. And so that's the kind of the quid pro quo that's going on. Even today there's people who travel around, may not be preaching Christianity, maybe talk about other things, but they can do this also. um it's not uh it's not some kind of special thing that only happens for people who are preaching the word of God. It happens to anyone who has something interesting to say and goes to areas where there's people who want to hear those things or have some interest or moderate interest. So this is what this going on faith lines is. But for the two by twos themselves, they take the evidence that these ministers of theirs who are getting housing and food given to them in these early years, by the way, like in the early part of 20th century, as evidence that God is on their side. Okay. They've made it in their head. There's like if you do this go by faith lines and it actually works, then therefore you have the seal of God. Not that there's maybe some other reasons for it, which I've told you what they can be. No, it's because God's doing it. Okay. So that's the idea for faith lines for the two by twos. And they have continued with this idea up until the present. Now, of course, very shortly after they go on their faith lines, after even a few years of this, they have established communities of two by two congregants, friends, who provide them with housing and food out of basically a duty, a system of duty, where if they don't, they'll be excommunicated, right? So it's no longer faith lines. It hasn't been by faith lines for a very long time. So they're effectively going around and staying in people's homes as a burden on these people. Now, the people, again, many of these people do actually want these two by two ministers in their home because there is social status to be attained from this. I had the two by two ministers in my house, for 5 days every month. Therefore, I'm clearly one of the anointed special ones in my two by two community, that kind of stuff. Um, these are ideas where the status is attained. So even when it's a duty, people have taken it, have read into it other things, right? Remember, in two by twoism, they're all jockeying for status amongst each other. So this has a very important lever to pull on, and of course, status is pride, right? So that's one of the things that's going on and motivating these people. But there's also they think there's an opportunity for have private one-on-one instruction with these two by two ministers. Now, of course, I mean, there is the potential for one-on-one talking, but whether there's actually going to be any serious instruction going on about Christianity is almost a number approaching zero. Okay, because these two by two ministers are almost all of them have very, very little understanding of Christianity themselves. So you can't get much assistance out of that. But nonetheless, these congregants, these friends, for the most part desire to have these two by two ministers in their home, and therefore this is not a case of actual faith lines. It's not the case that two by two ministers are going around and some guy just for no reason says, "Hey, you need to come and stay in my house." I have no idea why. I hate Christians, but for some reason I've just changed. I had him struck by a bolt of lightning, metaphorically speaking, and I need to help you. That is not what's going on. So this faith lines thing is obviously a hoax, but it's used as evidence that the two by two ministers are very special, very different than any kind of other religious figures, right? So obviously, like priests or pastors or so forth at other denominations, well, they aren't going by faith lines because they have somewhere to live, right? They have like a rectory or so forth. Maybe they even live in their own home, and therefore they're not going by faith lines. So they're obviously discredited. This is what the two by twos tell you. It's only the two by two ministers are going by faith lines, and God's providing for them. Therefore, they're the right ones. I mean, you can see the convoluted logic in this. But so the idea that you're going by faith lines, and therefore whatever you're saying must be correct because God's blessing you by providing for you materially. Again, this is all convoluted. Means that you shouldn't even consider looking at any other denominations, right? There's nothing else to learn from looking at other denominations. So this is a sleight of hand that two by twos have pulled on themselves. It's somewhat like of a magic trick, to be quite honest. And it's set up by not understanding the motivations that happen when someone, is going out talking, and other people are willing to provide this person with housing or food. Well, obviously temporarily housing and food. So again, like I said, there are many examples of this happening with all kinds of other great revival preachers from other denominations. In fact, there was all kinds of, there were sort of 4 great revivals in the United States over the past 200, 300 years, and the same sort of thing happened. And It's nothing special. And like I mentioned, there are even people in the contemporary era who are going around who are not religious in the way you think it, and they are provided with housing and food for free. So it's not anything to do with God, but again, the two by twos have misinterpreted it and basically fooled themselves with a magic trick. And so that the corollary of this is that they have said, well, we're doing it right because we have this faith line that's working. And well, what are we doing right? Well, what are we doing? Well, we have the workers, we have the meetings in the homes, and therefore that's what Christianity is. That's what the Gospels are. The Gospels are the workers and the meetings in the homes. Now, think of how stupid that is. The idea that somehow, if you say, well, God came down to earth, made himself into a man, and allowed himself to be crucified, and his whole message was meetings in homes and workers going out by faith lines. That's all it is. That's the message that God has for us. Wow, God must be pretty stupid, right? Because that's a pathetic thing to think. The message is going to be a lot more interesting and sophisticated than that, I would think. But that's where two by twos are trapped, right? They are trapped within their own faith lines magic trick.